The British Chamber of Commerce is one of the biggest business groups in the UK. It is probably the business group in the UK. So whenever they do sort of studies, or when they do announcements, or whether they sort of talk about these things, this sort of the group that we should sort of sit up and see what they are saying and sort of pay attention, because they bring a lot of business issues that sort of the UK business community is facing to the forefront. And especially when they are sitting up right now and are saying, so we've got a situation where especially exporting businesses are finding it really difficult to export to Europe. We'd like to see you do, side deals to ease the Brexit friction. And in their new report, they did the new report that's come out called the Withdrawal Agreement 3 years on. They look at what the problems are, what they've talked to businesses about, what they need to see, and the fact that we are diverging from Europe. And it's not that we are changing the laws, it's that Europe is advancing in its, it is advancing their own sort of rules, laws, and regulations. And of course, we've had a government that has really not been interested in, regulations. And as a result, it's not the fact that we are diverging, it's the fact that the EU is progressing on its own regulatory path, and that we are not keeping up, which is creating more and more red tape, is creating more and more barriers, that is making it ever increasingly harder for businesses to trade with the EU. Of course, our closest trading partner, it will always be the place where British businesses want to go and do, and where they want to go and do business. And if you are making it harder, then you are effectively really damaging the British economy at this point, almost on purpose. And this is why I would say that, Labour's plan to go and do these Brexit side deals and talk with the EU to see how we can sort of do this, or do we say, right, well, if the EU pass, this regulation, then, well, so are we, to make sure that, we are in alignment with the EU to help with lessen the Brexit trade friction. I still think that it is entirely possible to do these Brexit side deals, even though I know there are going to be lots of people down the chat saying, no, that's impossible. Well, I don't really think it is impossible. I think it's entirely doable. And as we saw from the Windsor Framework, the EU is entirely open to, doing deals, easing trade friction in and around this. So it is doable, and it takes, I think, a government that is willing to sit down with the EU and properly negotiate. And even with Rishi Sunak, even though he was sort of willing to sort of sit down and negotiate, and we saw that sort of change, that sea change when he came in, talking about Brexit and sort of the willingness to sort of do the sort of the Windsor Framework, we've seen that. But he hasn't been willing to sort out the main issue, which is, of course, the withdrawal agreement. Even the British Chamber of Commerce has been talking about this for years, even before that, saying, well, what's Brexit going to look like? Because businesses would probably like to, know what environment they're going to be trading in the future. So we're going to have a look at this report, see what it had to say and what the British Chamber of Commerce has had to say. And of course, what are the likelihood of Sunak actually paying attention? To be honest, I don't think not a lot. We've talked about this before, how even in the current Tory party, even something sort of sensible, to sort of ease Brexit trade friction isn't going to be possible at the moment, because there are still far too many Brexiteers who will just kick up an awful fuss about these things. But we'll see, of course, what happens when we eventually get a Labour government, because the chances are this time next year we'll be probably having a different government. So, fingers crossed. So, before we do get into this, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page, the one after today's link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can all buy me coffee. There's the YouTube thank you button, and of course the Pony Club as well. So let's crack on with this then, shall we? Oh, hang on. There we go. So, yep, this comes from the Independent reporting on this with the title Sunak must ease Brexit trade friction with the EU side deals, say business chiefs. So, Rishi Sunak should consider a wide range of supplementary deals with the EU to ease the ongoing trade friction after Brexit. Oh, hang on. There we go. Wait, there we go. Sorry, something popped up there. Sorry, see, yep, so oh, I've lost my place now. So yes, the EU must to do supplementary deals with the EU to ease ongoing trade friction after Brexit. Business leaders have warned. Almost 2/3 of UK exporters say that now selling to the EU has become even harder in the past year, according to the British Chamber of Commerce. Leading business group has now called for a series of Brexit agreements with Brussels on carbon taxes, VAT arrangements, and food checks to soften the impact of Boris Johnson's trade deal. And this is something that I think Labour is going to have to talk about, just how bad Boris Johnson's trade deal really is, how bad it has actually been for our economy. The Brexit report by the British Chamber of Commerce found that over 60%, so that's more than half of British businesses, and that's firms trading with the EU, said it is now more difficult than a year ago. And oh boy, it's only set to get more difficult on that. Only 18% of exporters to non-EU countries say that they had actually got harder. The new study, called the Trade and Cooperation Agreement 3 years on, also warns of significant new red tape headaches approaching as yet more UK and EU regulations diverge. The business chiefs called for a new supplementary deal with the EU, which either eliminates or reduces the complex forms required for small firms to export food. We talked about this before. This is massively going to hit the EU food, sort of the British food exporters, and their, the number one export to these or importing from this sort of side is going to be massively hitting them next year, and especially when these new checks come in. Checks that, bear in mind, the current Tory government has continuously kicked down and down and down the road time and time again. And as we said, there has to come a point where you either go, well, we really don't want to implement these checks, so we're going to have to go to talk to the EU to find a way where we don't implement these checks, or you implement them and then you have to deal with the consequences. And they have been very, very, very obvious to the fact that they do not want to deal with those consequences, and have a result continuously said, we ain't going to touch this with a barge pole. Even Jacob Rees-Mogg kicked this can down the road, the pro-Brexiteer that he is. So the British Chamber of Commerce has also called on Sunak to consider a VAT deal like Norway's that exempts smaller firms from the requirements to have a fiscal representative for tax inside the bloc. Again, if Norway can have something like that, then there is no reason why we can't do something like this. It is entirely doable, and I think having a different government that is willing to deal with the consequences and actually, have serious talks about this with the EU, then we can actually do stuff. And as we've always said, I think Labour's eventual plan will be to go, this is Brexit. Like, this is as best as Brexit is ever going to be. Are you really sure you want to continue with this? Otherwise, we're going to be, hitting our heads when we want to try and grow on our economy time and time and time again. And that's just the reality of it. As we always said, when Brexit meets reality, reality always wins. That's just been the inescapable fact that Brexiteers just haven't been able to ever accept. Even now, you can see they're not almost talking about, or refusing to talk about, Brexit. There has almost been this almost omerta silence from the Brexiteers themselves to actually talk about Brexit, which should say everything you want to know about how Brexit is going. So back where about? So yes, and of course the EU will be moving to bring in a carbon tax border regime, which requires imports to provide data on carbon usage. The government was urged also to merge its carbon pricing schemes with Brussels to avoid red tape. Again, there is no reason why we cannot seek to align with Brussels on all these things. There is no reason why Brussels would not be happy with that. There is no reason why they would not sort of refuse that. So more than 80% of small and medium-sized firms surveyed by the British Chamber of Commerce were unaware of the impact of the EU's carbon border adjustment mechanism. So that's also shocking that you have over 80% of firms just unaware of rules that were about to come in because the government's just not telling them. Previously, of course, when we're in the EU, the government would inform them of this. And the fact that you've got 80% of SMEs not even aware of the carbon border adjustment mechanism coming in, yeah, that's going to be causing a lot of significant headaches. And it comes down to the fact that most of these companies cannot afford to have people monitoring these things constantly all the time, because it costs a lot of money to sort of keep someone on staff to be able to continue to fill out all the paperwork on this. And then 70% were unaware of the new UK checks on food imports from the EU set to be implemented from February of 2024 after several delays. Oh, and that even more fills me with even more dread. The fact that you've got 70% of businesses even unaware of that worries me beyond all measure. It just makes me so worried on that front. There's lots of things we can do to make our current trading agreements better, but a growing worry is how we can handle these further changes coming down the track. Sylvain Halvier, the Director General of the British Chamber of Commerce, said EU businesses have been largely able to carry on importing goods to the UK as they did before Brexit, but that will change next year, and this could lead to new significant disruptions. He also said the rules and regulations governing trade are not static. Both the UK and the EU will be making significant changes in the next few years, which could have big repercussions. We recently talked about the new Not for EU stickers that are now appearing on a ton of goods. That's going to have huge implications on a ton of British goods and exports. That's going to be big. They also continue saying we need to take a very smart and flexible approach to how we handle these alterations to keep their impact to a minimum. There is it is in no one's interests to damage our trading relationship further. Exactly. We can only improve it. We can only go, honestly, really up from here. And having a government that is going to come in and actually say, well, yeah, these are going to be, causing significant problems. Maybe we do need to sort something out in and around this. That's going to be good. That's going to be good for businesses, honestly, as a whole. One small construction and engineering firm in Glasgow told the chamber in the report that they had continued difficulties trying to supply long-term EU customers, saying that the government has slated efforts just further and further away from trade deals does not help, but this distracts attentions now from unresolved problems. A spokesperson for the British businesses said that they are, quote, thriving, adding that in a year to June, they exported over £360 worth of goods and services to the EU, with an increase of over 17.1% in the current prices over the last 12 months. The government also said that the UK economy has grown faster than the Germany and France since Brexit, before acknowledging, quote, issues with trade friction. And bear in mind, if you've seen a lot of the news very recently, there's a lot of now experts warning we could be headed into a recession. That we are now primed to go into a recession. And that's worrying. That is incredibly worrying that we are potentially about to be heading to a recession on that front. They said that we acknowledge and do remain there are some issues, and we are listening to businesses. Well, not very well if you've got 3 years on, and yet businesses are still having significant problems, and yet you're doing all these, quote, trade deals that are further away, does not help the current unresolved problems that are still affecting businesses that have long-standing EU customers, like was just mentioned with the construction firm in Glasgow. Because eventually they could find that their customers in the EU just go, well, it's too complicated continuing to do business with this firm in Glasgow. We're going to look elsewhere. And it would not be the first time that we have seen EU businesses do that. So that is a big issue. That is a big problem that should be sort of certainly looked at and solved. And under the next Labour government, they are taking that seriously, because you cannot have a proper conversation about the British economy if you cannot accept that Brexit has not done harm to our economy, has damaged our growth. We know that from the government's own source, our economy is 4% smaller than it should be, and that's a lot of tax we're missing out on. That's a lot of money that could be in our economy that we don't have. And then you go, well, how do we solve this issue? Well, we've got to do side deals with the EU. We've got to talk with the EU. We've got to sort of, if they move on sort of regulations, then we've got to sort of match all these things. And then you start to have these conversations of, well, actually, why then did we leave the EU? What was the point? You know? And of course, as we always said, eventually we'll just end up back in the EU. You know? Like I say, Brexit, it was a completely pointless exercise because it gave Britain no advantages. It gave us really nothing that the Brexiteers promised. None of the promises that they promised have they delivered upon, even though they have been in power and, of course, the dominating factions in government for quite a period of time over this period. And yet, consistently, what have they done to try and improve the situation? They've done nothing. So, yeah, this isn't a surprise because we have been hearing this constantly, time and time and time again from UK businesses. And yet, what has the Conservative government done? Yeah, absolutely nothing. So we await to see what happens in an upcoming presidential general election next year. But as we always say, until then, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.